My sister and I swapped wedding plans, and the general was overjoyed. Later, my sister knelt before me and pleaded with me desperately. Chang Wanqing's fingertips trembled slightly as she pushed the gold-embossed marriage contract toward me. She could barely hide the greed in her eyes. She thought she had the upper hand. Under the pretext of doing what's best for my younger sister, she had snatched away the marriage to Qin Ziyuan, son of the vice minister of rights that should have been mine. Ning. Although young Master Xu Yuan is frail, he is highly educated. This marriage was originally intended for your older sister. It was only because Mother was momentarily confused that she agreed to it for you first. You've always been sensible. You certainly wouldn't compete with your older sister over this, would you? I lowered my gaze to the piece of paper, my fingertips gently brushing against the yellowed surface. What stirred within me was not anger, but a calmness as cool as ice water. In my past life, I had believed these words, even though I resented it. I forced myself to endure this injustice for the sake of so-called reputation. But now, what I see is not just a marriage contract, but a dead-end path leading to the abyss. In his past life, Qin Shu Yuan appeared aloof and noble on the surface, but in reality, he was a weak and incompetent turncoat, easily swayed by his wife's whispers. His so-called scholarly family was nothing more than a shell hollowed out by termites. Within 3 years, his entire family would be executed for embezzling relief grain and supplies. I looked up, a faint smile playing at the corners of my mouth, and casually withdrew my hand from the marriage contract. Since you like it so much, sister, then take it. I never wanted to marry into such a bookish family anyway. Spending all day poring over books would be rather boring. Chang Wanqing paused for a moment, seemingly taken aback by my immediate agreement. A flicker of surprise crossed her eyes, only to be instantly replaced by wild joy. Fearing I might change my mind, she quickly tucked the marriage contract into her bosom as if she were afraid I might snatch it back. You really don't regret it? Chang Wanqing asked tentatively, her tone still carrying a hint of undisguised arrogance. It is the will of my parents and the words of the matchmaker. Since my sister has made this request, I shall of course grant it. I stood up, smoothed out the hem of my skirt which wasn't even rumpled, and turned to walk out. The moment I stepped out the door, I couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. Chang Wanqing, you've gone to such great lengths to snatch away is nothing more than the rotten flesh that dragged me into the mire in my past life. Since you crave it so much, then please hold on to it tightly. Just don't come begging me on your knees when that great calamity befalls you in the future. Under the colonnade, a cold wind swept up fallen leaves and blew them straight into my face. I looked up toward the horizon. Not far away lay the direction of the general's mansion. In my previous life, Chang Wanqing, in her quest to curry favor with the powerful, had slandered Pei Jingxing countless times in front of her father, calling him a butcher and a brute who knew only how to kill and had no appreciation for refinement. But what she didn't know was that he was the only pillar of strength in this turbulent age. I took a deep breath and pushed those chaotic memories of my past life deep into my heart. Now that I've been given a second chance at life, this time I will make sure that Pei Jingxing's hands, calloused and bloodstained, protect only me. And I will make all those who once looked down on me and trampled on my dignity kneel at my feet. Behind me, Chang Wanqing's cheerful footsteps grew fainter and fainter as she walked away. She carried herself with the air of a victor about to seize another's treasure. I stood where I was, gazing at the withered lotus in the pond, and thought to myself, sister, I'm giving you this marriage exchange gift. Chang Wanqing returned to the mansion with the marriage contract she had snatched, and her laughter and joy seemed to burst forth like a flower blooming within the stifling walls of the Chang residence. She busied herself sewing her wedding gown and selecting jade ornaments for her dowry. Her eagerness to become the wife of a vice minister was so palpable that the servants in the mansion secretly mocked her. As for me, just as she had wished, I became the victim of that stolen marriage. My father, Chang Yanji, looked at me with nothing but disappointment in his eyes and even a hint of hidden guilt, yet he never once intended to seek justice for me. In his eyes, Chang Wanqing's marriage into a prominent family was an honor for our clan, while I was nothing more than a pawn to be sacrificed at any moment, even if it meant having my betrothal broken off. Every day, I still sit by the window grinding ink, as if completely oblivious to the rumors swirling outside. Yet, behind those calm eyes, I am waiting. At this very moment in my past life, Pei Jingxing was in the eye of the storm, facing impeachment by the imperial censors over the border conflicts. That decisive and ruthless general of the state had a terrible reputation in the capital. Literati and scholars viewed him as a scourge, claiming he exuded too much malevolence, had offended the star of literature, and was a bringer of misfortune to his wives and relatives. Any woman who married him was doomed to misfortune. Sure enough, within just 2 days, a gold-embossed invitation was delivered to my father. The invitation was extremely simple, containing only a few words, yet it embodied the full authority of the general's mansion. Pei Jingxing was to be married, and the Chang family was required to agree on a candidate within 3 days. As my father looked at the wedding invitation, his hands were trembling slightly. He didn't dare take Chang Wanqing to the ceremony after all. Qin Shuyuan's wedding date had already been set, and besides, he felt that the general's mansion wasn't a suitable place for her to end up. So, his gaze naturally fell on me. Ning my father said as he walked into my study, his expression complex and his tone somewhat commanding. There's a wedding coming up at the general's mansion. Your sister's marriage has already been arranged, and you're now of marriageable age. This matter, you'll have to take care of it. He didn't even ask if I was willing. There was a hint of condescension in his tone, as if pushing me into the general's mansion, that so-called den of lions and tigers, were a favor he was doing me, a reluctant measure taken to preserve the Chang family's reputation. I looked up at him, my eyes calm and unruffled, and simply bowed my head in submission. I leave it entirely up to you, father. Upon hearing my agreement, my father let out a long sigh, as if 1,000-gene burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He thought I was weak and easily manipulated upon he could effortlessly control. Little did he know that deep within my heart, ripples had already begun to form. That Pei Jingxing, enspeared by the world and cast aside by my sister like a worn-out shoe, had finally come before me. The wedding date was set very suddenly, with only 5 days to go. Over the past 5 days, the entire Chang household has been in an uproar. Chang Wanqing has also been busy preparing for her lavish wedding. She even went out of her way to come in front of me to show off, her every word dripping with sarcasm about how I was about to marry a butcher who could die on the battlefield at any moment. Little sister, it's not that I'm being heartless, but a man of Xiao Yuan's caliber is the only one worthy of a daughter of a marquise family. As for that general of the guards, I've heard he has a scar on his face and looks like a fierce demon. If you go with him, I'm afraid you won't even be able to sleep soundly from now on. If you ever find yourself in trouble, don't hesitate to come to me. I'll certainly look out for you. She was dressed in a bright red wedding gown, her eyes and brows brimming with unconcealed smugness, as if she were looking at a clown. I merely smiled faintly, adjusted her collar, and said softly, "Thank you for your kindness, sister. I appreciate it, but I believe that in this life, living with dignity is better than anything else. Some things simply cannot be forced." Chang Wanqing snorted coldly and turned to leave, her back radiating utter disdain. She thought I was putting on a false smile, but little did she know that I was actually feeling sorrow for the fate that awaited her. That all show and no substance. Qin Ziyuan, how long could he possibly last in the political arena? 3 years, 3 years at most. Only when the Qin family crumbled would Chang Wanqing finally realize what kind of power and influence she had once cast aside like a worn-out shoe. On the day of the wedding, a light snow fell over the capital. Over at Chang Wanqing's side, there was much fanfare and music, though lively. It still had an air of shabbiness about it. After all, the Qin family was merely a scholarly household in name only, unable to produce any real wealth. On my side, while Pei Jingxing didn't go overboard with extravagance, the wedding procession sent by the general's mansion was enough to awe the entire crowd. A full 300 elite cavalrymen, clad in heavy armor, rode down the long street, their hooves thundering. This was no ordinary wedding procession. It was an army that had carved a bloody path through the frontier. The people of the capital hurried out of the way, their eyes filled with awe. As I settled into the palanquin, I felt a sense of control I hadn't experienced in a long time. In this world, while scholars may write beautifully, when it comes down to a matter of life and death, Only swords and blades can safeguard the peace of a region. Chang Wanqing seeks refinement and empty glory. But what I seek is a powerful foundation upon which to secure my place in this turbulent age. Through a corner of the palanquin curtain, I caught a glimpse of Pei Jingxing. Though he was dressed in a red wedding robe, it could not conceal the fierce, ruthless aura that lingered between his brows. He was tall and had a stern face. Just as Chang Wanqing had described, there was indeed a faint scar running across his brow. But this did not detract from his heroic bearing. If anything, it made him seem even more dangerous, yet also more dependable. He sat astride a tall, majestic horse. When his gaze fell upon my palanquin, it lingered for a moment before turning away, and he looked coldly ahead. He probably felt that this was nothing more than a marriage of convenience dictated by circumstances, and he harbored no expectations for the substitute put forward by the Chang family. I lowered the curtain of the palanquin, a playful smile curving my lips. Pei Jingxing, we have a long life ahead of us. I'll make sure you know that I, Chang Lining, am by no means some docile little rabbit you can manipulate at will. In this life, I will not only be your wife, but also the strongest pillar of support you'll ever have. The wedding car moved slowly forward, and I could feel the curious yet reverent stares of those around me. From this day forward, I am no longer the timid second young lady of the Chang family. I am the wife of the general of the Imperial Guard, and one of the most distinguished women in the capital, second only to the Empress. The wind and snow grew a little stronger, making a soft rattling sound as they pelted against the window panes. I knew that this was not just a wedding, but the beginning of a war. Sister, I hope your days at the Qin residence will go as you wish, just don't give in too soon. The thunderous sound of gongs and drums dispelled some of the chill from the capital, but beneath the clamor, two starkly different fates were unfolding. Chang Wanqing and Qin Shiyuan's wedding was scheduled for the morning. It was said that, to keep up appearances, Chang Wanqing had gone so far as to empty her personal savings to buy several bolts of inferior red silk and borrow some finery, all in an effort to make the Qin family's poverty-stricken residence look exceptionally grand. What she craved was the vanity of being surrounded by a crowd. She longed for all the dignitaries at the wedding banquet to witness her good fortune in marrying into a family of high-ranking officials. As for my palanquin, it wasn't until sunset that it turned off the long street and headed straight for the general's mansion. Compared to the shabby bustle of the Qin family's home, the general's mansion appeared exceptionally solemn. There were no red ribbons draped across the mansion gates, nor any of that cheap, ostentatious festivity put on for appearance's sake. Only 2 rows of stern-faced guards stood with halberds in hand, their iron armor reflecting a chilling, heart-stopping glint in the setting sun. Every passer-by, upon seeing the imposing plaque above the general's mansion, would unconsciously quicken their pace, as if a god of war, one too fearsome to look upon, resided there. The moment the palanquin curtain was lifted, there was no sharp, nagging urging from the matchmaker. Only a large hand with prominent knuckles and thin calluses extended toward me. That hand was powerful. The roughness at the base of his palm came through the sleeve of his wedding robe, conveying a fierce intensity born of years spent gripping a sword. I slowly placed my hand on top of his. Through the slit in the veil, I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel the steady, yet oppressive rhythm of his breathing. My lady. His voice was deep, hoarse from the hardships of battle, devoid of any warmth, yet it somehow brought a sense of peace. There was no so-called jumping over the brazier ritual, nor any cumbersome formalities. He simply took my hand and led me down the long, desolate corridor. The general's mansion was vast, but it was too quiet, so quiet that I could hear the night watchman striking his gong in the distance. Chang Wanqing might mock me for not even having a single maid to attend to me here, but that suited me just fine. I have no need for that kind of insincere flattery. Nor do I need a bunch of servants gossiping behind my back. After entering the bridal chamber, he dismissed all the servants. When he personally lifted my veil, in that instant, the air seemed to freeze. Pei Jingxing's gaze was piercing. Those eyes, which had witnessed countless lives and deaths on the battlefield, were now scrutinizing me without reservation. I did not lower my head, nor did I show the slightest trace of shyness or unease. Instead, I calmly met his gaze, my eyes reflecting his cold, stern face. He furrowed his brow slightly, clearly not expecting this replacement sent from the Chang household to have such a look in her eyes. In the presence of a well-bred young lady like Chang Wanqing, he was fed up with her feigned vulnerability. But my unabashed composure, on the other hand, struck him as somewhat novel. I hear you weren't originally supposed to marry me. He poured himself a glass of strong liquor and downed it in one gulp, his movements wild and carefree. He didn't ask if I harbored any resentment. Instead, he launched straight into this question, one that would have sent any ordinary woman into a panic. I picked up the wine jug, poured him a cup as well, and laughed softly. Marriage is a matter decided by one's parents. Since His Majesty has arranged this marriage, you are my husband. As for whether I was the one originally intended, does it really matter? What matters is that I am now the general's wife. He set down his wine glass, a playful smile curving his lips, and the scar on his brow twitched slightly. Those stuffy old fools at the Chang household have actually raised a rather useful pawn. Aren't you afraid? Everyone out there says that anyone who marries a man of the Pei family won't live past 3 years. If you, General, are capable of protecting the border in these turbulent times, why can't you protect your own little corner of the world within these walls? I looked at him, my tone firm. Besides, if I can't even hold on to my position as the general's wife, then I'm not worthy of standing by your side. Pei Jingxing looked at me, and a rare flash of surprise crossed his hawk-like eyes. It was probably the first time he'd encountered such a bold response. Or perhaps no one had ever dared to speak of worthiness in his presence. He reached out, and the rough pads of his fingers gently brushed against my cheek. Though the touch was prickly, it gave me a sense of authenticity I'd never felt before. Very well, he said with a low chuckle, the sound finally stripped of some of its harshness. As long as you're not afraid, you're free to rummage through the inner quarters of the general's mansion as you please. Just then, a series of hurried footsteps could be heard outside the door. The butler reported in a hushed voice from outside, saying that a congratulatory gift had arrived from the Chang family and that it was specifically intended for me to open personally. I sneered inwardly. Chang Wanqing had only been married for a few days, yet she was already eager to show off her happiness. I suppose the Qin family must have recently curried favor with some powerful figure, making her feel she had gained some clout and finally had a chance to save face in front of me. The general's wife. I didn't even look at the gift. I just had the butler throw it straight into the storeroom. Pei Jingxing raised an eyebrow. Aren't you going to take a look? After all, she's your sister. There's no need to look at them. They're just a bunch of worthless trinkets, only showing them off to prove how wealthy she is now. I stood up, walked to the window, pushed it open, and gazed at the bare plum tree in the courtyard. General, my sister will soon realize that there are some things in this world that cannot be bought with mere empty fame. The happiness she thinks she has is nothing more than a tower built on sand. The slightest downpour will bring it crashing down. Pei Jingxing walked up behind me, his broad chest pressed against my back, the scent of rust from the battlefield and the crisp, wintry air surrounding him completely enveloped me. If you want to do something, don't worry about saving face over there. His tone was matter-of-fact, yet it carried a hint of protective domineeringness. In this mansion, no one will ever let you be wronged. My heart skipped a beat. I turned my head to look at the stern-faced general, and a sense of security unlike anything I'd ever felt before welled up inside me. In my past life, I lived in someone else's shadow, enduring time and again for the sake of so-called sisterly bonds, only to end up in such a tragic state. But in this life, I have Pei Jingxing and the authority that fills this entire mansion. I'll be sure to see if Chang Wanqing can still stand before me with such arrogance when her so-called husband is behind bars. Outside the window, the moonlight shone brightly, illuminating the imposing buildings within the estate. I knew that starting tomorrow, the power struggle between Chang Wanqing and me would truly begin, and what she thought was the end was merely the beginning of my revenge. I closed my eyes, savoring the rare sense of cool calm and peace in this very moment. Here in the general's mansion, I am no longer the timid second Miss Chang. I am Chang Lening, about to take control of my own destiny, and those who once betrayed and looked down on me will, in the not-too-distant future, kneel one by one at my feet, begging for my mercy. Life at the Qin residence was far from as glamorous as Chang Wanqing had imagined. Qin Shuyuan was nothing more than a scholar in name only, though he possessed a certain pedantic literary flair. He knew nothing of human relations or how to manage a household. He was obsessed with poetry and prose, showing not the slightest interest in the day-to-day necessities of the household, let alone dealing with the complexities of official dealings. It was only after Chang Wanqing married into the family that she realized the Qin household's accounts had long been in the red. Their so-called scholarly lineage was merely a facade, sustained by pawning off ancestral property to keep up appearances. A few days later, Chang Wanqing, looking haggard and resentful, forced her way into the general's mansion under the pretext of visiting family. As she watched me move through the vast mansion, though I had no retinue of maidservants by my side, I exuded an air of nobility wherever I went. Jealousy began to grow wildly in her heart like a venomous snake. "My little sister is truly blessed," said Chang Wanqing, sitting on a pearwood chair. The handkerchief in her hand crumpled in her grasp as her cold gaze swept over the room's furnishings. "Though the general's mansion may be a bit desolate, it's still a place of power and influence. Unlike me, who's worked myself to the bone just to keep up the Qin family's reputation." Her words were laced with bitterness as she deliberately flaunted the not particularly expensive brocade robe she was wearing, as if it were a priceless treasure. I sat at my desk, holding the military map Pei Jingxing had left behind last night, without even lifting my eyes from it. "Since you find it tiring, sister, you should get some rest," I said calmly. "Young Master Qin is a scholar. Surely he'd know better than anyone how to look after you." Compassion. Chang Wanqing snorted as if she'd heard a joke. "All he knows how to do is write sappy verses about spring melancholy and autumn sorrow. Wouldn't even know how to pick up a fallen oil bottle. Not to mention those maids who are always fawning over him in his study, distracting him all day long. Little sister, you really are lucky. General Pei may be cold, but after all, you're his only wife." She grew more and more agitated as she spoke, as if she were treating me like a trash can for her grievances. I set down the map, looked up, and fixed her with a piercing stare. "Sister, surely you didn't come here today just to vent your frustrations. If you're after money, the treasury of my general's mansion is no charity hall." Chang Wanqing turned pale as a sheet when I asked her that. She had indeed come, thick-skinned as she was, to borrow money in order to keep the Qin family's ramshackle shops afloat. She had assumed I would be generous out of sisterly consideration, but she never expected me to be so ruthless. "You. How could you be so heartless?" Chang Wanqing jumped to her feet, glaring at me with venom in her eyes. "That marriage back then was something you owed me in the first place. If I hadn't helped you fend off that match with the general's family, would you be in such a position of power today?" I gently turned the jade ring on my finger, producing a crisp click that sounded particularly jarring in the silent main hall. "Sister, you've got that backwards," I said as I slowly stood up, walked over to her, and lowered my voice. The icy aura of authority I exuded caused her to involuntarily take a step back. "It was you who stole that marriage that was doomed to fail. It was you who took that rotten piece of flesh from the Qin family into your own arms. And it was you who schemed relentlessly to climb the ladder of power here in the capital." I paused, a hint of pity in my eyes. "You should thank me. If I hadn't been so tactful, how could you have gotten your wish and become the wife of a vice minister? As for the suffering you endure now, it's merely the price you had to pay for chasing short-term gains back then." Chang Wanqing trembled all over at my piercing gaze. She pointed at me and was speechless for a long time. You're nothing but a madman. Do you think that just because you've hooked up with Pei Jingxing, you're in the clear? He's nothing but a sword-wielding thug. The day the political situation in the court shifts, you won't even know how you died." With those words, she fled the general's mansion in disarray. As I watched her receding figure, not a flicker of emotion crossed my eyes. The bar for entry into the general's mansion is very high. Since she chose that path, she should be prepared to be shattered to pieces. As for me, what I need at this very moment is something else entirely. Pei Jingxing was leading a training exercise at the drill ground. I changed into a sleek riding outfit and, accompanied by several personal guards, went straight to the training ground. Those soldiers, who were usually unruly and defiant, showed a touch more respect in their eyes when they saw me. Over the past few days, I'd used the accounting skills I'd learned at the Chang residence to help Pei Jingxing sort out the chaos in the distribution of provisions, saving him a great deal of trouble. "How come you have time to visit today, madam?" Pei Jingxing had just leaped down from his horse and accepted the towel handed to him by his bodyguard. The trace of dust on his face made him look even more rugged. "Let's go watch the general train his troops." I walked over to him and handed him a jug of warm water. "I heard that someone in the court is bringing charges against the general, claiming that the border defense budget is too high." Pei Jingxing paused briefly as he took a sip of water, then let out a cold laugh. "A bunch of pedantic scholars who know nothing but how to spout rhetoric in the imperial court. What do they know about military affairs? As long as I don't fall, they can't do a thing to me. They can't touch you directly. But if they can find an excuse to cut off your supplies or have that weak-willed political rival of yours take charge of your military provisions, won't you, General, find yourself at their mercy in every way?" I said softly, my gaze fixed on the war horses on the training ground. "General, the waters here in the capital are even murkier than those on the frontier. Some people want to pull you down from that position, so they have no choice but to strike at your rear." Pei Jingxing looked at me, and his eyes, which usually carried a hint of detachment, now sparkled with deep interest. He hadn't expected that a woman raised in seclusion could see things so clearly, and even cut straight to the heart of the political intrigues at court at a glance. "What are your plans?" He set down the teapot, his tone suggesting a desire to discuss the matter. "It's simple," I said, gazing into the distance. "Since someone's trying to meddle with the provisions, let's take the initiative. Isn't that teacher of Qin Shi Yuan's in charge of organizing the provisions right now? If we can just catch him red-handed in dereliction of duty, we'll not only secure the general's military funds, but we'll also get rid of that thorn in our side." Pei Jingxing burst out laughing and patted me on the shoulder. Though his touch was firm, it carried an unprecedented sense of approval. "Very well. Since you have such courage, madam, I'll leave this matter in your hands." He didn't dismiss this as the frivolous antics of a woman confined to the inner quarters. Instead, he sincerely endorsed my plan. In that moment, I felt the exhilaration of fighting side by side with him, while Chang Wanqing was still fretting over those few pieces of silver. I had already begun laying the groundwork to push the Qin family, the very family she took such pride in, to the brink of ruin. It was late at night. I sat by the lamp, poring over the records of the Qin family's dealings with that official. That day, as I sat on a soft couch in the general's mansion, listening to the news brought by the scout, my heart remained completely unmoved. When Pei Jingxing returned from the training grounds, he was shivering with the cold. Yet the vigor in his eyes was impossible to hide. He unsheathed the blood-stained long sword, tossed it to his attendant, strode over to me, and pulled me into his arms. "My lady's foresight is uncanny. With that old scoundrel out of the picture, the shortfall in military funding has been covered, and even those troublemakers in the court who had been impeaching me have become much more subdued. However," he paused for a moment, a hint of teasing in his voice, "I bet your sister's rice jar is almost empty by now. If she's capable, she'll find another way. If she isn't, then that's just her fate. I leaned against his warm chest and said calmly, "Of course I know the situation Chang Wanqing finds herself in now. The Qin family estate has been confiscated, leaving nothing but a dilapidated little courtyard. Chang Wanqing, once the wife of a high-ranking vice minister, has fallen from grace overnight and is now forced to scurry through the streets just to scrape together a few coins to survive. That good-for-nothing Qin Ziyu, and all he does is whine about how his talents are unrecognized. He doesn't even have the strength to go to the docks and carry bags." Sure enough, in just half a month, Chang Wanqing's figure reappeared outside the general's mansion. This time, she was free of her usual arrogance and jealousy. The faded, bleached white garment she wore could not hide the wear and tear of life etched across her body, and her once radiant face was now as sallow as paper. She did not force her way in. She simply knelt on the cold stone steps, bowing her head again and again. "Ning-er, little sister, I beg you, please, just see me once." Her voice was hoarse, filled with a heart-wrenching plea. "I know I was wrong, I truly do. Qin Shuyuan is on his deathbed, and our home has gone dark. I beg you, for the sake of our past bond, save him and save me, too." I pushed open the window and watched her shiver in the biting wind with a cold gaze. How all too familiar the scene was. In my past life, I had found myself in a similar situation, to beg for a chance at survival for that so-called husband. I had knelt at Chang Wanqing's doorstep, and how had she treated me then? From her lofty perch, she had poured a basin of cold water over me, mocking me as a shameless, cast-off wife. "My lady, should we send her away?" The guard at the gate asked coldly. "No need," I said, drawing the curtains, my voice as calm as water. "Let her kneel. The steps of this general's mansion may be hard, but they'll help her see herself clearly. I know that what she's kneeling before now isn't just power and influence, but her dignity, which has long since been shattered into pieces on the ground. She once thought she had grasped the ladder to glory, not realizing it was actually a noose leading to her ruin. I've long been fully aware of the tragic situation at the Qin household. It wasn't that I truly intended to drive them to despair. Rather, when a person, driven by greed, willingly sacrifices family ties and schemes against their own kin, the outcome is already sealed. From the moment Chang Wanqing tried to steal the bride, she had already lost. Pei Jingxing walked over to me and looked at the figure kneeling outside. A hint of impatience flashed in his eyes. "Do you want me to have her thrown out? She's just crying and whining," he writes, "really annoying." "Let her be," I said, taking Pei Jingxing's hand. "General, do you know why I made her kneel?" Pei Jingxing looked at me. His eyes, as sharp as those of a tiger or a wolf, held both deep affection and a searching gaze. "Because I want her to understand that, in this world, honor gained by relying on others is ultimately meaningless," I said slowly. "She once trampled on my dignity. Now, I'm going to make her watch in the coldest of timeses the things she cares about most fade away, bit by bit, until they vanish into thin air." Chang Wanqing was crying herself hoarse outside the door, calling out her father's name and clinging to those cheap emotions of the past. But what good would that do, in the face of power and survival? The family bonds of yesteryear were as thin as a cicada's wing. As I lay in Pei Jingxing's arms, listening to the sound of wind and snow outside the window, I felt a sense of peace I had never experienced before. Chang Wanqing's suffering was nothing more than an insignificant move in this grand game. What truly threatened me were the political rivals still lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce, and the very foundation of the state, which could collapse at any moment in these turbulent times. "My lady, you've changed." Pei Jingxing suddenly leaned close to my ear, his warm breath brushing the side of my neck. "You're even more terrifying now than those officials in the imperial court who scheme and backstab one another. Isn't it the same for you, General?" I turned my head to meet his gaze, a gentle yet icy smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "We are all like duckweed adrift in these turbulent times. If we don't want to be swept along by the current and crushed, we have no choice but to become the ones at the helm." He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not only a man's possessiveness, but also respect for a partner who was his equal. Here in the general's mansion, we were plotting the grand scheme to overturn the political landscape. While Chang Wanking forgotten in the snow had long since become a pawn of no further importance to us. As night deepened, Chang Wanqing's sobbing finally ceased, leaving only the howling of the wind and snow. She had probably fainted. Or perhaps she had simply given up all hope. In any case, the bitter fruit of her own making had finally come to full ripeness. Early spring in the capital has been accompanied by a late winter cold snap. And a chill still lingers in the air. Chang Wanqing's 3 days of kneeling at the gates of the general's mansion ultimately failed to secure even a single grain of rice or half a copper coin. In the end, Qin Shi Yuan was dragged out of the dilapidated courtyard and dumped in a mass grave, where he was hastily buried. Having lost her last source of support, Chang Wanqing was driven out of the capital on a snowy evening and vanished completely from the bustling city. The Chang family had long been struggling to survive. Chang Yanji, the father, had been stripped of his title because of his close ties to that corrupt official in his early years. Not long after, he died of grief. That family, once bustling with visitors and known for its shrewd calculations, vanished in the blink of an eye. Like a wisp of ash in the great capital, I sat in the seat of honor at the general's mansion, holding a cup of warm Longjing tea. Pei Jingxing was taking off his armor, revealing his broad back. He had sustained countless wounds on the battlefield. Each scar was a medal of honor for him as the general who defends the nation. He turned his head, and the look in his eyes as he gazed at me was no longer the scrutinizing gaze of our first meeting, but one filled with deep reliance and affection. Those old men in the court no longer dared to propose cuts to the military budget, said Pei Jingxing as he walked over and gently ruffled my hair, his tone unusually light. The emperor was very pleased with the military farming policies you proposed back then, and they're already being implemented. This is only the first step, I said, setting down my teacup and gazing intently at him. Only when the borders are secure and internal unrest is quelled can you hold your position as general with confidence. Pei Jingxing looked at me and suddenly chuckled softly. Chang Lining, sometimes I really wonder just how many schemes you have up your sleeve. If you'd actually married that weakling Qin Shi Yuan back then, he probably wouldn't even have known how he died. I gave a faint smile but didn't pick up on the thread of the conversation. In this world, aside from myself, no one would ever know the depths of despair I had once endured. Nor would anyone ever know just how long I had struggled in the darkness to rewrite that tragic ending. Chang Wanqing's fate was the trap I wove with my own hands, but I've never considered myself cruel. In this dog-eat-dog world, kindness without an edge is nothing more than a lamb led to the slaughter. I've never spoken to anyone about my past life. That memory has become the sole secret in my heart, a whip to keep me in check, and the driving force that propels me forward. As the afternoon sunlight streamed into the room, I gazed at the lush courtyard of the general's mansion, and an inexplicable sense of peace welled up within me. This is what true life is all about, not the backstabbing and scheming of political intrigue, nor the humiliation of fighting over a man, but possessing enough strength to protect those I care about and to safeguard this little corner of the world that belongs to me. My lady, spring has arrived and the flowers are blooming. I hear the peach blossoms outside the city are absolutely stunning. Pei Jingxing leaned closer to me, his large hand resting on the back of mine. Would you like to go see them? I looked up and met his eyes, filled with tenderness. In my past life, he had always been aloof, living a life of political intrigue and bloodshed. There had never been a moment of such tenderness. But in this life, I've shown him a Chang Lining who is not only capable of wielding great influence in the imperial court but can also roll up her sleeves and cook for him. Okay, I replied softly. I got up and walked to the window, gazing at the blue-gray bricks and green roof tiles in the distance. The scenery of the capital remained the same, but it was no longer the sight from my past life that had made me sick to my stomach. I had paid the price of an entire lifetime to gain this clear-headed control. As for Chang Wanqing, she may still be in some unknown corner, selling her dignity just to survive, or perhaps she has long since destroyed herself in despair. But none of that matters anymore. She is no longer a shadow in my life. She is merely a passerby who chose the wrong path in the face of Fatia. Footnote in my story that is not worth remembering. The ending of this story contains neither heart-wrenching lamentations nor the madness of losing oneself to revenge. Though I stand at the pinnacle of power, I still retain that clarity of mind deep within my heart. Pei Jingxing remains the general whose very name strikes fear into the hearts of men, and I am the only general's wife in this turbulent age. We walked hand in hand out of the general's mansion, where the carriage was already waiting quietly at the gate. A spring breeze blew by, ruffling the hair at my temples. I turned my head and took one last look at the imposing mansion gate, and the resentment and bitterness in my heart vanished completely. In this life, I've lived for myself and to put a perfect period on those times that were once wasted. I've written that ending with my own hand. In this world, there is no such thing as a rebirth without a reason, only souls unwilling to bow to fate. I have succeeded. I have made every person who once trampled on me pay the price, and I have become the most noble and clear-headed woman in the capital. The spring sunshine shone on my face, filling me with warmth. Pei Jingxing reached out and took my hand firmly once again. This time, I didn't look back. I simply walked toward a brighter future, basking in the radiant spring sunshine. As for everything from my past life, it had long since sunk into the abyss of time along with those heavy memories, leaving no trace behind.